Hello you all, I'm BlaqueWitchYaya. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. And this video is going to be part 2, look at me doing part 2s, of the video before about TJ Young and the Orishas, the gatekeeper staff. You guys know I did part 1. We talked about TJ, we were introduced to his parents, his friends, the situation that's going on. So make sure you guys tune into part 1 because we are going to pick up right where we left off. Like I told you guys before, this book right here and right here, hello, it's very colorful and vivid. So I'm just doing a synopsis and a little summary of what happened in the story, but when you read the book or listen to the audiobook, you're able to catch on to every detail because I'm going to be skipping around, playing double dutch and hopscotching, because if I were to go through every detail to paint the full picture, I will literally have to read the book out loud just so y'all could catch on to everything. Also, the people who purchased the book, do not give away the ending, okay? We don't want to ruin it for the clouded, you know what I mean? So while I share this story with you guys, I will be making my crystal dry rub, which is a mixture of herbs for an all-in-one crystal charger and cleanser, which is my official product legally. So if you see it anywhere else, let me know. Which is a way to charge and keep your crystals cleansed without smoke or liquid. You could sprinkle some of this at the bottom of your jewelry box to keep your crystals in there. You could sprinkle some and set it outside under the sun or the full moon. Basically a quick and easy way to keep your crystals cleansed and charged to your energy, and you can get yours from BlaqueWitchYaya.com only. So now we are going to pick up right where we left off. TJ has hit the scene in New Orleans. The Cajun is getting to him. The jazz music, the accents that I do so well, baby. That NOLA accent. Y'all know I can listen to a NOLA accent all day. Oh my gosh. But now he is in New Orleans and he is getting ready to make his way to Camp Alosa. So while on his way, literally the magic is happening. You guys know before it was kind of like the magic is hidden and you know they don't want people to find out. Here they like do wop pop pop, let's go. It's kind of out there in the open. So that was nice to see in my head as I listened to the book. So even the way they got to camp was magical. But first let me do a quick breakdown of the characters so you can know who I'm talking about. So of course TJ, the main character that we are talking about, and then there is a young lady that he has a crush on by the name of Manny, who is also one of the campers at Camp Alosa that he becomes friends with, and also a gentleman by the name of Joshua is also a camper at the camp as well. And then we have Iodu, which is like, you know, they start off a little beef real quick because he's like the know-it-all kid, but eventually they become friends because he was being nosy, so they had to take him along in the mission in the long run. So we're going to stop right there with the characters, and as I introduce them you'll see them pop up here. So like I said before, the magic is happening. Even with the cab, while he's in there with his mama, Manny, her daddy, the driver, the cab turns into a boat to go over the swamp to enter into Camp Alosa. And then while they're riding along in the cab, the tree talks saying bonjour Francois. Like it's just like all magical. They meet old Sally, which is an alligator that's considered the camp mascot, and she's gonna play a major role in the story as well. So it's like everything right now is like out in the open. You don't have to hide it anymore, so we really get to see the Ashe displayed. So they're entering into the camp, and I know you're like, okay, if this camp is in the middle of New Orleans, how is no one finding out about it? So Monsieur Francois, the tree, the talking tree, he does a ritual every day using the power of Oya to distract the noise and what's going on. Make it seem like, you know, nothing to see here. Just pass along. Because the boat was so loud, TJ was like, okay, so how y'all just doing this out in the open with no one seeing using the power of Oya? And then if one or two hoodlums try to make their way inside the camp, old Sally, the alligator, will, you know, take care of them. Speaking of old Sally, there's a scene in this book where they're riding along the swamp, right? Y'all, side note, this just reminds me, if y'all watch Princess and the Frog, you know how the little dragonfly be like, down by the bayou? Immediately when I heard the swamp, I was like, oh, down there by the bayou? Anywho, so while they're riding across the swamp, the alligator was acting a little funny, and the cab driver was like, I don't know what's going on. Why the alligator acting like that? And TJ is like, of course, me being bad luck with no eye shade, this alligator is probably like, why is this regular kid up in here? And the alligator like size TJ up, like gets up close to it, but then just turns away. And the cab driver's like, okay, I ain't never seen the alligator do that. She get that up close to you, she probably was ready to eat you. That just goes to show later on in the story we will find out the alligator has a sweet side for TJ. And you will notice there's a lot of people who have a sweet side for TJ, not only because they know him because of his sister, but it's something special about TJ that is revealed in the story. So now TJ is at camp and he is seeing the Ashe all over the place, and he's starting to feel a little nervous and intimidated because, again, like I said before, TJ hasn't discovered his Ashe. He doesn't think he have it. He thought he got his dad genes with just no magic at all, hence why he's at the camp as well, to kind of play catch up. So like, it's just like even the simple things, the kids are greeting each other with magic handshakes, got flames popping up in their hand and all that. So TJ like, oh boy, here we go. So now that we're at camp, I want to show y'all or share with y'all one of my favorite parts of the book. To me, it's just so simple and so sweet, but it's just so deep because I feel like this is something that I face often. So TJ sees a little boy by the name of Gary. He's crying, right? And so TJ like, it's okay, it's my first time too, blah blah blah. I bet you're way better than me. I can't even fill a water bowl. Remember before I was telling you guys that TJ and his family kind of recognized that he has Ashe because he was able to finish the water ritual that his mom was doing. That's why I said watch part 1 because you're kind of going to be lost. And so the little boy was like, you don't know how to do a water ritual? Like, what in the world? So TJ was like, well, show me how you do it. So he begins to do the water ritual, and instead of waving his fingers like his mom did, he starts to wave his hands to produce the water. And the little boy says, my dad says this is the wrong way to do it, but it works for me. Story of my life. Side note, I just feel like that was so deep because obviously it worked for the boy because he was able to, you know, produce the water, and like his dad says that's the wrong way to do it, but it works for him. And I'm like, that's right, little boy, because everybody Ashe is different. The way you do stuff may not look like somebody else's, so you don't need to copy and paste their stuff. I felt like this part was so deep because I feel that in spirituality, you guys have probably faced it as well. There's always people trying to correct you, saying you're doing it wrong, I'm doing it the right way. Or if you're trying to watch a video and learn, someone's like, yeah, I know people do it like this, but you do it like this and I'm right. And it's like, if what you're doing works for you, keep doing it. Like for me, I have people that try to correct me, and it's like, well, if I'm wrong, I don't want to be right because my stuff be working. So if it's wrong, just let me beat ya. So going along with the camp, TJ's meeting all of the counselors and everything. And then of course they're figuring out who he is. They're giving his condolences because we know that his sister passed away. So they're like, oh my God, she was amazing. My sincerest condolences and all that good stuff, right? So they know who he is. So now it's time for check-in, right? And y'all, TJ is trying to sneak in his sister's staff into the camp because he's like, listen, the last time my Ashe was really out and popping, I had my sister's staff in my hand, so I need to get this in. So he's at check-in, and a counselor by the name of Mr. Malawi ends up checking his bag, sees he's trying to sneak a staff in, and kind of just lets him slide. You know, like, okay, go ahead and take that in. So of course TJ's like, okay, he's letting me take this in. That's weird because they were using magic to check everybody's bag because like I said, these kids were using magic. So they would do spells to try to hide certain items that they're trying to sneak in. So they had like the counselors had their staff and like kind of tapping it, doing their spell to make sure ain't nobody trying to sneak nothing in. So of course TJ got nervous because he's trying to sneak in a whole staff. So TJ gets in with the staff. Then there's a kid by the name of Iodu. Like I told you guys before, they start off beefing at first, but then they end up friends in the long run. So he's giving him the tour, and he's like, you know, this is the elementary side, this over here is the baby stuff, this for the people who don't really know what they doing. So he's giving a tour and just talking to him like that, and TJ's kind of like, it is me who does not know what I am doing. And like he kind of got nervous, like, oh, he calling all this stuff baby stuff, but meanwhile I still don't even know how to do a simple spell. This is going to be me. He's talking to TJ, and in conversation Iodu finds out that TJ's sisters is the Ife Dio. So he's like, don't think you about to get some special treatment because your sister's some icon, like don't do all that. So immediately I feel that's when the beef started because he's like, oh my God, his sister is Dio, so Lord knows how magical he is. Meanwhile TJ is like, you ain't gotta worry about me, you ain't got to worry about me. So this part is interesting as well, because as I'm listening to the audiobook, I'm expecting the classes to be like, wave your wand like this to the right now, ashe. Like, I'm expecting it to be like, this is how you hold your staff, this is how you use the beads. Meanwhile, they up there running laps, they up there solving riddles, brain puzzles, having pop quizzes like a regular school. And TJ's like, okay, so while we learning all this, then one of the instructors explains, when you're doing magic, it's exhausting. That's why she has them running miles, because it's like, when you get done doing a spell, you have to have endurance. Of course, there's a staff that could take out most of the energy, but what if you don't have your staff and you just do a spell? The next thing you know, you sleep for 3 days. Like, you have to build your endurance. So that's why they're making sure that you're not only fit spiritually, but you're fit physically as well, because the two will impact each other. So you have to make sure both have good endurance, which is true. Same thing with your brain. You're crafting these spells, you're saying these things, you have to remember all these rituals. So you want to make sure that your physical brain is strong enough to take on these word phrases and all this stuff and be able to think intellectually along with your spiritual side, because they're going to act as one, basically making sure your physical is good so your spiritual could be even better. For example, if you're trying to do some manifestation, some scripting, or some spell work, but you haven't slept good in 3 days, you've been eating junk food, you're tired, you're exhausted, it's going to have an impact on your spiritual side. You have to make sure that both are in good stance and you have good stamina, so you can work to the best of your ability and enhance your spirituality as well. So although TJ is nervous, he feels a little bit behind, he's not alone. He develops friendships with Manny, with Joshua, and with Iodu later on in the story. And let me just give you a quick breakdown of these characters. So like I said before, Manny, if I read it or understood it correctly, she is Brazilian and she is at the camp as well. And last year it was told that no student got chose to go to E5 Academy, because of course they're at camp to be selected to go to E5 Academy. So last year they were like, oh, no one was selected. But Manny Girl was selected, but she didn't get to follow through with it because something came up. So then we have Joshua. So you would think just by looking at Joshua that he is behind, just because he's having trouble with the miles. He's like the underestimated kid, so everyone's looking at him like, oh child, he can't even keep up with the mile. Meanwhile, he's number 1 out of all the kids in the ranking, because they ranked him as well. If he could even get more nerve-wracking, they ranked him, and Joshua is number 1. Then we have Iodu. He's very smart, he knows his stuff down to the T, and you can tell he's just one of those kids that's trying to make it no matter what. Like, don't mess with me, I'm trying to make it. And I feel like initially he may have been intimidated by TJ, because his sister is the Ifedayo, so she was like the top-notch person, so he may be thinking like it's some type of gene that run in the family. Meanwhile, TJ is like, listen, I'm here trying to figure it out myself. So he's very smart, intellectual as well, and he plays a major part in the missions and the adventures that they go on later in the story. So now we are introduced to Mr. Balawe. Mr. Balawe is now one of the new teachers there, because Mr. Whitaker all of a sudden just decided not to show up, so he is now in replace of him. So just as a reminder, you guys know that TJ's main purpose of being at this camp is to try to figure out what happened to his sister. So of course he's trying to learn stuff along the way, discover his ashe, play catch up, but his main goal is to figure out what happened to his sister, to hear her voice again, to see if there's somehow some way that he can speak to her, right? Let's fast forward to a campfire that happened at the camp, where Mr. Balawe decided to share a story with the campers. And the story went a little something like this.
I recently had a conversation with a very wise Babalawo. Forgive me if I don't get everything right. This is a very paraphrased version. He took in a deep breath, closing his eyes and letting his chest fill until there was no more space to let in new air. Then he let it all out in one long exhale. When his eyes opened, they had lightened slightly, less a natural brown and more a silverish, almost white hue. Every camper sat at the edge of their logs in anticipation. Then Mr. Balawe finally spoke. As we all know, our people come from the land of old Ile Ife. Long now has it been a place of peace, relatively. A few of the elders chuckled, and Balawe smiled before continuing. This story is the tale of how we diviners earned our power. It started with a war between the river people and mountain dwellers. Mr. Balawe seemed to scan each face in the crowd, old and young alike. A few of the elders who sat near the white flames nodded in approval of the telling. The campers sat with wide, curious eyes, TJ among them as he sat forward. The Riva people, Mr. Balawe went on, were done with the fighting. But their chief wanted nothing to do with the other humans who had stolen his land's healing berries. So he asked Oshun, the Orisha of rivers, to carve him and his people a home. And so she did, creating the Benue and Niger rivers to give the chief the protection he needed. Joshua at TJ's side crossed his arms. "What's wrong?" TJ asked. Joshua's eyes widened and he fixed his expression. Oh, nothing. It's just, my grandmother told the story different, is all." Mr. Balawe wiggled his fingers along the campfire, and an image of humans atop a mountain sprang forth. But the mountain dwellers pursued the river people, empowered by Ogun, the Orisha of iron and war, who showed them the way across the new rivers, and war continued. The flames transformed to show the acts of war, clashing swords, arrows through the air, famine, and bloodshed. The heat of the flickering war licked at TJ's chin, and his eyes watered at the image of emaciated children, who were more bones than skin. There was nothing to eat when everything else was on fire. When Oko, the harvester, could no longer sustain the fields of blood, he went to Olodumare, the unseen monarch, and begged him to intercede, to stop the scouring of their good earth. Balawe clapped his hands together. "Now, campers, this is where the story really gets interesting. So pay special attention here." A light twinkle shined in his eye, something beyond the reflection of the firelight. Oludumare decided then to turn to his most knowledgeable advisor, Orunmila the Wise, and asked what should be done. TJ's focus sharpened. Orunmila was Dayo's Orisha. Never one to rush, the Wise pondered for 16 days and 16 nights. On the dawn of the 17th day, he answered his monarch. The Orisha should leave the humans to their own affairs without interference from the divine, he said. The unseen monarch asked about the coastal folk of the lands, and Orunmila told him that, for the most part, they had kept themselves out of the fighting. Coastal folk too? How many different people are there in this story? Little Gary asked from within the crowd. Only 3 tribes, Mr. Balawe beamed. I assure you, there are no more. But these people, the coastal folk, are the most important, as they are the root of our ancestral path. Oh, Gary stretched. Okay, I think I understand now. Mr. Balawe continued. The Great One did not like this and said, I will give these coastal folk a sliver of my power to quell this war of the mountain and river. These coastal folk shall be the mediators and the bridge toward a new age for the people. And if they do not slow this war, then we shall leave the mortals to their fate. TJ's rear end had become sore from how far along the edge of his log he was sitting, and his ears seemed to pulse with the strain of listening intently. This was the sort of thing he needed to know, a forgotten tale, something that he couldn't just look up on Evo or anywhere else. This was information that could only be learned from a diviner like Mr. Balawe. But the chosen children failed the great monarch, Oludamare, in the end. Ogun's mountain dwellers won the war with the chosen children's help, who grew hungry with their new power. They forced Oshun's river people to surrender with more dead than even the great Orishas could count. And Oludomare, shamed by the humans, tried to take their power away. But before he could, he disappeared. Never seen again in the sky realm, the aqua realm, the terra realm, or even the mortal realm. Oh, a few of the younger campers exclaimed in whispers. Mr. Balawe's eyes fell over TJ for a moment. The flames dancing around the man's arms started to dissipate. The lake and the amphitheater around them darkened. Orunmila the Wise gave us one message, a divination of the unseen monarch's return. The true details of his message are still debated to this day. But one thing the oracles all agree upon is the destined manifestation of a promised child who would uncover the unseen monarch. TJ's heart dropped into his stomach. The promised child, TJ thought as the rest of the campers started mumbling to one another. That's what they called Ifedayo at her funeral. But that Orunmila Orisha was wrong. The oracles and all the priests were wrong. Ifedayo might have been aligned with the great oracle, but she still died anyway. What's wrong? Joshua asked at TJ's side. TJ hadn't realized he'd been frowning. Nothing. Really, nothing. Sorry, I just got a lot on my mind.
So there goes that promised child talk again. And since hearing that story, TJ is like, well, here go this promised child again. I'm up here trying to hear from my sister. Who's the promised child? Was she the promised child? So am I second in command for the promised child? Am I supposed to continue her story? What is all this? Why is there an Orisha missing? Orisha goes missing, but now the Orisha's not talking to the humans no more. Why are you not talking to the humans no more? So he's trying to figure all this out when his main shebang at the first time was like, I'm just trying to hear from my sister and figure out what happened to her. While all of a sudden I feel like I'm on a mission. Like, why do you guys know that TikTok trend was like, is this story about us? Yes, TJ, it's about you. So TJ couldn't even really focus from like the classes, not paying attention, because that story stuck with him so much, and he feel like that story is going to be a map or a guide to figure out what happened to his sister. So of course he does his research, and they're at camp. So he goes to the library to continue his research. So while at the library, remind you, this is a very, very magical place. So he sees these masks of the Orisha just kind of laid out and thrown all over the place. He probably thinking some of these little kids probably was up here playing with them and just messed them up or something. So he's going through the mask and he found Orunmila's mask. And remember, Dio was a child of Orunmila, so he's like, perfect, here we go. Let me ask Orunmila what's tea, like what's going on. So TJ asked the master question, like, could you tell me what you meant when you said the promised child would discover what was lost? And then the mask replies, a promised child would rise with the light if a fallen star, and the lost monarch will return once more, yet at the only behest of one of many chosen children. One must go to the great water of the lagoons to start down the divine path. Find the light in the deep and you will have all you desire. So immediately TJ is like, so what's the fallen star? Because he remember hearing that fallen star from part 1 that I told you guys about. But like, if Dio's the promised child has died. So is the story even true? Like, what, like, should I be paying attention to this? So is this really a mission that can be accomplished if the promised child, quote unquote, is no longer on earth? So whilst TJ is trying to figure all that out in the library, he is interrupted by Adaola, which he was very surprised to see. You guys may remember Adaola from part 1. She was friends with Dio. She had on the pink, white, and burgundy beads, the daughter of Oya and all that good stuff, right? So they're chopping it up. She tells TJ like, yeah, I work here. That's why I'm here. I work here. So she tells him like, hey, that's not Orunmila's mask. That's Eshu. He's a trickster, so sometimes he'll like basically shapeshift and pretend to be other people just to play tricks. Even the elders get that mixed up sometimes, right? And so he's like, hey, funny seeing you here. She tells him like, oh yeah, I work here, all that good stuff. So he basically tells her what's going on, because she's like, why are you researching them? So he's like, I heard this story about the promised child. And the last time I heard promised child, they were describing Dio, but Dio's no longer here. So if this really meant to happen, how come did she die? Is this not going to be completed? Are the Orisha no longer going to talk to the people? So he's giving her like the whole breakdown, right? So let's fast forward. He tells her everything that's going on. She ends up giving him a journal that she says that she forgot to give him at the funeral that belonged to his sister. And it's like, well, wow, thanks girl, this could have helped a lot. Not to give away everything or make this video too long. It's already super long, I know. Let's do some fast forwarding. So basically there's an assignment that happens in one of the classes where TJ believes that he hears his sister's voice, right? we found out later in the story that wasn't even his sister's voice. And so he's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And like I told you guys, he became friends with Manny. So Manny is down with everything that he's doing. She knows all of what's going on, what he's trying to do for the most part, right? So eventually she tells him like, that girl cannot work in the library because first of all, nobody really knows who she is. Even the staff that's there, they're actual statues and they never even seen her before. So basically they're like, she's not a camper. She don't work here. Why does it seem like she's following him? Also during this time too, there's rumors that keepers are on the premises, and you guys know keepers were the one that interrupted and intruded and started a whole shebang at Dio's funeral in the first part. So immediately he's like, are they following me? Like, what's going on? And eventually they come to the conclusion like, I snuck the staff here before they were after the staff. Maybe they're not after me. Maybe they're after the staff, because the situation where he heard his sister's voice, you know, the first time he touched the staff and the staff began to change colors. But they end up asking one of the elders there about the staff changing colors, and she said, that's not a good thing if the staff crystal changes colors. So all this time he thinking it's a good thing that he hears just the voice, that he's like connecting or whatever, and it's not even a good sign. They're thinking that she is probably a keeper just up there trying to plot the right scheme to get up on TJ. So now they're like, operation let's catch Iodu in a lie, expose her for being a keeper. But now they can't find her, so now they have to find some way somehow to get in communication with her, to try to talk to her, to see what's going on and play stupid just to see what information she's willing to give up. This is where they find out that they have to sneak into one of the counselor's office because no one's allowed to bring their phone. They need to sneak into one of the counselor's office because they have a water bowl, and you guys know in part 1 I told you that the mom was communicating with the grandmother through a water bowl, so they're trying to communicate with Adaola through a water bowl as well. So they have to go to one of the counselor's office. So while they're trying to sneak out, this is where Iodu becomes friends because he saw TJ trying to sneak out, so he followed behind him. So now he's in on the plan too to try to break into one of the counselor's office. Again, TJ hasn't really discovered how to use his ashe yet, so Manny and Iodu are up there trying to break through the office, untie things. They end up getting caught in the whole setup. Oshun had TJ in the headlock and wasn't letting them go. Poor little Tink TJ was trying to do his best with the ashe. He up there throwing up all over the office. Get caught by one of the staff members, right? So she's up there trying to figure out like what's going on, like why are you trying to sneak into the office? And basically TJ for the second time in the story is thinking he's about to get kicked out, but he doesn't, because the first time he thought he was gonna get kicked out, him and Iodu had a little tussle because Iodu was talking mess. TJ was like, don't try me and my sister. Then all of a sudden he discovered this little part of his ashe where he had a gust of wind to throw Iodu back. They was boom 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 back and forth. So Mr. Malawi kind of gave him a slap on the wrist and said, hey, just don't let that happen again, because he thought that that was like going to be the reason he get kicked out. And so you guys may be noticing a trend how everybody kind of being a little sweet on TJ. The alligator in the beginning, Mr. Malawi for not kicking him out, for basically fighting and not apologizing, and now this camp counselor who's just like, well, you just won't be able to participate in the fun stuff during the summer. So while he's up in the office too, he discovers that his parents haven't been paying because they can't afford it. They up there trying to sell the house to make sure that he could be in his camp. But TJ's like, I don't even know my ashe, so there's no reason for y'all to be wasting y'all money on this camp. Don't sell the house trying to discover magic that I don't even feel like I have. It's a whole lot going on. So when I say I am skipping around. But I just want to give y'all that quick breakdown so we could get to this next part. During the break of the camp, TJ is able to go back home. So after all that went down, he thinking he hearing his sister's voice, trying to break into the camp counselor's office. He's making friends with Manny and Joshua, and they're doing good, but he just still feels like he's not doing good. And even Joshua and Manny said like, yo, I think my ashe is better around you. Like when I'm near you, I feel like I can do magic more easier. Things just come easier for me to develop. And Iodu like, yeah, you ain't nothing but a lucky charm. This was back when it was beef, and he was just like, you just ain't nothing but a lucky charm because you don't have ashe, but everybody else is able to utilize your energy to improve their ashe. Which leads to this conversation that takes place. But before we get to that, TJ's talking to his parents like, don't sell the house. I'm not going back to camp. It's a waste of time. It's just a lot going on. Don't try to waste your money on me trying to discover ashe. I'm 14 and I still haven't discovered it yet. Let's not stand on ceremony. We know what's going on. So the parents call Mr. Balawi to talk some sense into TJ, because TJ is like dead set on, I'm not going back. There's no point, because he already feels behind. So he's like, so what's the point of me going back if I already feel like everybody is so advanced and like it ain't, but basically it's not worth selling the house. So Mr. Balawi comes and he has a conversation with TJ.
Do it. Tomori, listen. I was not completely forward with you last time we discussed your sister. I didn't just know her well. I didn't just serve as one of many unnecessary mentors. I was there when she passed. In large part. It's my fault she isn't sitting with us today. She and I fought alongside each other when things went bad. Very bad. She wouldn't have been with me if I could have just done it myself. But I told you, she had a big heart. She would have never left me alone. TJ's thumb dug hard into the side of his finger. He was expecting this sit-down to be about him going back to Camp Olosa. But a turn like this? Balawi was there with his sister when she passed? A tightness pressed into TJ, a deep sense of hardening that wouldn't quite let him breathe. What are you talking about? He asked. Fighting against what? The keepers? I can't get into any of it. Not now. Not while everything's still under investigation. Images sprang to mind of the most savage fight he could imagine between his sister and faceless keepers. Blood coming away from deep cuts on her face, flame enveloping her clothes, and screams, terrible screams. It made his heart drip like acid tearing through his veins. But weeks of waiting, hours and hours of wondering the truth, forced the questions from his mouth. Did they hurt her bad? Was she in pain? I couldn't say, to be frank. He rubbed at his jaw. It's a lot to explain, and I'll be sure to tell you when the time is right. But what I need to make clear is how important it is that I get it right this time. Balawi closed his eyes and took a breath before continuing. I made a promise to myself that day never to let something like that happen again to any diviner. And you, Tomori, are that second chance, if you allow yourself to be. Second chance at what? I've already proven I'm not my sister. Balawi shook his head. No, you are not your sister. You are not a child of Aurunmila. You are not a child of Eshu. And you are not a child of Shango or any of the others. I spoke with Director Simmons and her sister Elda Adeyemi, and I've been observing your progress. It's obvious none of the Orisha align with you or your Ashe. TJ slumped back in his seat, his half-eaten patty and shake forgotten now. Mr. Balawi gave him the cold, hard truth. No sugarcoating like TJ had gotten mad at before. For once, the man was being honest with him, and TJ didn't feel any better for it. In fact, he felt worse. But, Mr. Balawi threw up a light finger, this does happen from time to time, rare as it is. During the transatlantic trade, Ogiyan, venerated now as the Orisha of Cassava, was not recognized until that time. Even Olokun was merely known as a famed merchant until they ascended. Every few generations, there's an entirely new Orisha that sprouts up. Not just a diviner, Tomori, an Orisha. TJ lifted his eyes to the man, to Mr. Balawi's lips, which were on the edge of a smirk. So are you trying to say I'm an Orisha in a teenager's body? Well, not exactly. It works a bit differently than that, but essentially, yes. And your family line has been known to be quite powerful. TJ glanced down at his hands and thought about how they so often tingled. In his short time studying as a diviner, he never read anything about a sensation like that. and the wisps he sometimes saw when people manifested Ashe failed to be mentioned by any of his books, or those old masks, or any instruction from the elders. Seeing Ashe isn't normal, is it? He asked. Mr. Balawe quirked an eyebrow. Seeing? After the funeral, I started to see Ashe like a faint fog. Every time I brought it up, someone would correct me. Does that mean I'm, like you said, different? That could certainly be it. I've seen the other students with you. Mr. Balawe leaned forward. How well they do when you're around. Think about it. Think on what the Orisha do, what they give us. We channel through them to make the extraordinary possible. Just as your fellow campers seem to funnel through you. I don't understand that though. Wouldn't I be good at least one thing? Listen, I know what happened in Simmons's office. Just think back on what you did there. TJ shook his head. I had Manny and Io with me, to be honest. I probably couldn't have done half that stuff if they weren't with me. Balawe leaned back in his chair, then ran his hand through his naps and curls. There may be more to it than just your friends. Mind racing back to that night, TJ wondered if something special had been going on. He thought it was just another inconsistent use of his magic. Some tap that he sprung because of desperation. Something any kid could have done in the same situation. But now, Mr. Balawe was suggesting something else. Something far more unique. A power that only popped up every few generations, he had said. Balawe laughed and said, It's like Einstein said. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. What's your nickname at camp? I think I heard that Iodu boy say it. TJ rolled his eyes. Don't make me say it. I don't want you just to say it, Balawe chided. I want you to own it. TJ sighed. Lucky charm. That's right. And what does a lucky charm do? Bring good fortune to others. And you're more than that.
You guys heard that correctly. The reason why TJ hasn't discovered or figured out his Ashe is because the story hasn't been written for him yet. He dealing with a whole new Orisha. He could be a whole new Orisha. That's why he's literally writing the story as this story is taking place. So now TJ's like, heck yeah, I'm going back to camp. Let's fast forward. TJ is going back to camp. And this is where I'm going to slow down because this is where funk hits the fan. I'm going to have a few spoilers for y'all. But let me just do a quick breakdown of some scenarios and some situations that happen while at camp. So they're trying to do certain rituals during a certain phase of the moon to hear Dio's voice, to figure out what's going on. Eventually, the friend Joshua, he figures out what they're trying to do because he's eavesdropping. Like I said before, he really clinged on to TJ during camp, trying to be his friend, figure out what's going on. He's just a sweet kid trying to make things happen, trying to make friends. And he's really smart at the end of the day. Like, he knows as shoe down to the bone everything about him. Iodu, y'all probably figured out about him being a show off and kind of, you know, a little rude, that he's the son of Shango, of course. And then of course when we now we know TJ could be a new Orisha or dealing with a new Orisha. So he meets back up with now Manny, Iodu, and Joshua. So they're really coming together trying to figure things out. Joshua really showed up and showed out with his skills, trying to help them. But in the end, not even in the end, within a few chapters after him going back to camp, we realize Joshua isn't the cute, innocent kid that we as the listeners or the readers thought he was. While back at camp, TJ gets the opportunity to go to the Orisha plane, to interact with the Orisha, to speak with certain Orishas, to make a deal with a certain Orisha that he has to fulfill. But even the ending of the story is not the ending of the story, because it continues. So if you guys want to know what happens in the end, because I sure won't be telling you so you can experience the book yourself, I'll have all of the information down below, whether you'll like to listen to the book or read the book. I'll have everything linked down below and some information about the author. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. You can purchase your crystal dry rub from BlaqueWitchYaya.com. But like I always say, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. Until next time, you guys, I'm Shay.